Hi, this is Dave from the Floodwood Industrial Arts program, and I'm just going to talk about our sauna that we've been working on. As you know, we sided most of the sauna. We got a little bit left to side on the gable, and I'm going to walk you through that, cutting angles. And I just want to talk about how to side, how to start out, just some simple basic things. One of the things that we did when we started, we had a steel wainscoting going up with a Z flashing on top of that, and that Z flashing works for waterproof. And then we Tyvek'd the wall behind both the steel and the cedar. There's Tyvek behind it, but then we slit the Tyvek so that way the Tyvek could go over the top of the Z flashing, so when water would run down, it wouldn't run behind the flashing, it would run over the top and then flow out. So we did that. After we did that, we put our first piece of siding on, sitting on top of our Z flashing. And then we created a story pole. We knew that we were going to have a 6-inch lap, so I cut a story pole that is in 6-inch increments. So I cut it at exactly 60 inches. And then I put a line every 6 inches. So we have a mark at 6, 12, 18, 24, and so on. And after we had the first piece on, we take the story pole and we sat it on top of the first piece. And then we put a mark on the wall on each end. We put a mark on each end at every 6-inch increment. And then we snapped the line horizontally. I forgot to mute my phone. Then we snapped the line horizontally. It was just a telemarketer. We snapped the line horizontally so that way we would have straight siding. And there's a couple different ways that you can do siding. We chose to use a story pole from end to end, snap a line from end to end so we had a straight line. You can also make a little jig with a stop on the bottom, 6 inches long from the stop to here, and use a jig. Those work. You can buy jigs like that, and they'll actually clip onto your siding, so it's easier to do by yourself. There's numerous different ways. Myself, I prefer making a story pole and snapping a line. That way I know all the way through the house my siding is straight. And if I have to make any adjustments, I can determine how to make them as I move up the wall to a window siding, something that isn't on an older house that isn't straight. I can make those adjustments. But with a story pole, snapping from one end of the building to the other end of the building, you're going to end up with straight siding all the time because you're following the line. And that line is the top of your siding. And so we use that story pole. Like I said, it works out. You can see now when you check it, at the bottom of every piece of siding, you can see the marks. One of the things we use in nailing the cedar siding on, we have splitless wood siding nails that we got from Menards. They're a bit of a ring-shaped nail, galvanized nail that we use to fasten the siding. And you want a splitless nail because cedar has a very good tendency to split. And another thing that helps when nailing siding on is the different types of hammers. I have 3 different hammers. This is commonly my framing hammer, but I would use this one for most things because this is what I'm comfortable with using. It doesn't have a waffle head, so I can use it on the siding. I'm not going to put a mark, and this one I'm going to have the best accuracy for myself. This one is a finish hammer. Most people with the siding, you're going to have a harder time pounding the nail in. You'll end up bending the nail more often. You'll be better off using, this is the 20 ounce, it's a shorter hammer, handled hammer, but you'll do better with a hammer like this, nailing the siding in. But it all depends on you. Find a hammer that works for you, that you feel comfortable with, that you can swing and not damage the board and not bend the nail as you're swinging. and pounding it in. So we have a few pieces of siding we'll put on up on top. We'll go to that. When you're putting the siding on, we had measured from end to end. We have 2x6 corners on each side, and we're fitting the siding in between. So we're measuring the exact dimensions in between. And I measured 87 and 7/16. And on the cedar siding, I like to leave an 1/8 inch gap on each side. So I'm going to cut the piece of siding a 1/4 inch shorter, allows for any expansion, contraction, anything. We'll fill that open joint with a bead of caulk that'll match the color of the siding. So I have 87 and 7/16 is tight. I'm going to cut my piece at 87 and 3/16. And I already cut a couple pieces. Anytime you're cutting, especially the cedar siding, you'll find that, they came in 16-foot lengths, but you'll find on the end a lot of the pieces, they're going to be split. So plan before you start to take one end, cut 6 to at least 6 inches off of the end. Sometimes you might have to cut more depending on how far the piece is split. And so that's what I did. Cut some off of one end, measure from that end, 87 and 3/16, and I have my piece. So it's a fairly short piece. I can do this by myself. And we had stamped blue lines all the way across, all the way up. So that's the top of my piece of siding. When we did the story pole, we set it on top of here, and we measured up. Now in the same concept, if you can't get the story pole in there, we've been following a blue line, so you can set your tape measure on top of the siding and mark 6 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches, all the way up. It's the same concept as a story pole. You're on a straight line, do that on both ends, snap a line across. So we've done that. Now we're going to put our piece of siding on. We're lining the top of the siding up with the blue line. And as I said, we made the siding a 1/4 inch short. And the best way to put the piece of siding on, I'm going to hold it tight to one side. I'll put a mark on the piece of siding and on the wall, and I'm going to slide it to the left. And I'll put another mark in line with the piece of siding. I see I've got my 1/4 inch gap. I want to be right in the center of that. And you can do this without marking, but just for showing you, that's what I'm doing. So then you line your mark on your piece of siding up with your center mark. Hold it on the blue line. And you should have your studs marked, so you're nailing your siding into your studs, and you're pounding a nail. One thing to do on most sidings, where you're going to face nail, a good height to put the nail is the thickness of your pinky finger. So wherever your pinky finger is, hold it on the bottom, put the nail just above it, and that's where you're going to nail your piece of siding. And I'm starting in the center. And I'm going to nail that just snug. And then I'm going to go to each end. If the piece of siding happens to be bowed, I might have to go and skip every other stud and nail it because the siding has got a bow in it. And that's pretty common with cedar, that it's going to be bowed. Again, line it up with the line. Nail each piece, nail each end. Another thing on the area, you don't want to be right on the end because that will split. So stay a little bit away from the end. I'm about an inch or so away from the end. It's about as close as I want to go. And you'll go and you'll nail off the rest of the siding. So that piece is done. So we finished. It obviously needs a few more nails, but we'll get to that. Now, our next piece. So I have that line here. We could measure our length off of our short point all the way across, following that blue line from the soffit to the soffit. Myself, I prefer to measure from the long points. It's just easier to measure by yourself. You can hook on the end, especially on long pieces. So what you need to do now, we have a 6-inch lap. So on each end, you're going to measure up from the bottom of your piece of siding. You're going to measure up 6 inches and put a mark on the siding. And then you're going to go vertically up. Remember, you have an 1/8 inch gap. So we're going to have this piece of siding that's going to be square, and then there's going to be a long 412 angle. So we're going to measure up straight up the end, an 1/8 inch away until it hits the siding, to that mark, and then write it down. Do the same thing on the other end, and they should be fairly close, but not always. And you'll have your vertical marks where your angle is going to start. We already know length of siding. When we measured, I checked to make sure that 87 3/16 would work for a couple of pieces. So I don't need to measure it on this next one. I know that's what it is. We've got that piece cut. Now on each end, on the right side, pay attention to the right side and the left side in case the dimensions are different. We're going to measure up to the angle on the right side, and then measure up to the angle on the left side. And so we'll move to that. Okay, so we have my piece of siding cut to length. So on our right side, we're going to measure up right on the very edge. We're going to put a mark there. That's the start of our angle. That's our long point of our angle. And I'll do the same thing on the other end. Put that mark. So our roof is a 412 pitch. And there's a couple ways to make a 412 angle. And there's two different types of angles. There's a short 412 and a long 412. Standard way would be using a 2-foot square. The 2-foot square has numbers on this edge, numbers on this edge, and you would follow them. And on a 2-foot square, if it's a 412, you would line 4-inch mark and the 12-inch mark on your edge of your board. I'm just going to use this piece as a sample. 4 inches, 12 inches. I'm going to line those up from here to here. And you're going to have, I'm going to flip this the other way just because I'm going to cut it. So I got 12 inches over here, 4 inches over here. And you can draw that line. You can also, because it's a 2-foot square, you can double that. Because this isn't long enough to reach, so instead of 12, I can go 24. Your square is 24 inches long. So that's the very end of the square. And this side would be 24. This side, 412 double, would be 8. So I'm going to line up 8 in the very end of the square over here. And there's my angles. So the long side of the square, that would be a long 412. The short side of the square, that angle would be a short 412. So that's one way to do it, using a 2-foot square. You can use standard speed square, and you can draw an angle on there. We know we need a long 412 because it's the roof. We're going horizontally into it. We need to have a long 412. So on our square, we have a pivot point. So this pivot point is always going to be our starting point. And it'll say pivot point right on the square with an arrow. Most of them that I've seen have that. So you're gonna line that up, that's your pivot point. And then you have different marks here. This bottom mark, these are degrees. 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 15, 20, 40, 50, all along there. This next mark is your pitch. A 112 pitch, a 212 pitch, 312, 412, 512, 6, etc., all the way down. The third line, you don't have to worry about that so much. You won't get into it until you start cutting hips and valley and framing, that type of stuff. So we won't even worry about going into that. So for now, you need to know the pivot point, the degrees, and what pitch we're doing, 412. So we're starting at the pivot point. I'll do it the same way. Pivot point, and I'm pivoting off that point until the 4 lines up with the edge of the, and I draw a line. Now I just drew a short 412. If I want a long 412, I flip my square, line this edge up with that line, and draw a line here. So now I have a long 412 and a short 412. I can do the same thing with a 1 foot square, since it's a bigger board. Set it on there, line the 4 up, 4, draw that all the way through. So there's my standard. I can flip it over, line the marks up, draw that line through. And there you have that. Another way you can do it. So a 412 degree, 412 pitch roof, if you line the 4 up, make sure your pivot point is tight, your 412 is lined up on the edge, look at your degree, you'll see that a 412 pitch is 18.5 degrees. Your long is the inverse of that. So you would subtract 18.5 from 90. So 90 minus 18.5 degrees, you're going to end up with 71.5 degrees. So you can take your square, and I'm going to use the long one again, put a pivot mark here, and I'm going to pivot till I get to 71.5. Lines right up. There's my long 412. So that's how you determine your angles. There's numerous different ways to do it. Very basic, 2 foot square, speed square, 1 foot square, same thing, flipping them around, or going by the degrees. If the angle, the pitch, and the degrees is 25 degrees, if that's the angle, you know 90 minus 25, that'll be your long angle. So now what I'm going to do, just to make things simpler, I've got a scrap board here. It's about the same width as my siding. I'm going to use this as a pattern. So I'm going to cut that angle on here that we drew, the long 412. So now I have a pattern that I can use. And the reason I wanted a pattern is now I don't have to trace out my angle anymore. I can use this all the way up, as many pieces we have, as long as we don't have to make adjustments to the angle. And another reason is we measured up here. It was 3 15/16. We measured up. So we don't have that edge to put the board on. So I'm going to use my pattern, line the bottoms up, make them flush, and just slide the angle until I hit the mark that I had made on the end of the piece of siding. And once I have that, I can draw my line. I can draw that, I can flip the board over, do the exact same thing. on the other end. Line it up flush. Slide it to the mark. And draw your line. Now your board is ready to cut. Remembering when you cut your board, remember what side your blade is on. This is the piece I want. This little triangle is the piece I don't want. So you always want your blade on the side of the line that you don't want. Okay, now we'll go back to seeing if this fits. All right, so I have the piece of siding up here. We're going to see if it fits. We have that blue line across, and now it's just a reference point. We're going to slide the piece of siding, push it tight to the right side. I'm going to put a mark up here again on the piece of siding, and in the exact spot on the Tyvek, slide the board to the right, or to the left. Put another mark. I'll see my gap, and now I'm just going to move it till it's centered. And then I'm going to line the piece of siding up. I'm going to look at my angles. My angles follow pretty good there. And my line is good. I'm just a little bit low, but that's okay. I'm about a 16th low. But I'm not too concerned about a 16th. It's not even quite that, but and then we'll line it up and start our nails. And again, we have a few more nails to put in, but that's enough. And now we're going to, the rest of the way up, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to measure up 6 inches, and I'm going to measure where 6 inches hits my soffit. And I'm going to put a mark there on both sides. Wherever 6 inches hits my soffit, I'm going to put a mark right there. And that's going to give me my length for my long point. I said I prefer using my long point. It's just easy to measure. So we're going to measure from end to end. And we get a length of 73 and 13/16. It's always good to write the dimension down, so that way if you forget, you don't have to remeasure. So we have 2 more pieces to put on. Going to go through the exact same process. We're going to use that jig. We'll make an angle on one end. Once we get one end cut, we'll measure from right to left or left to right, however you cut it. We'll measure out 73 and 13/16. We'll use the jig on the other side, right on that mark, line it up, mark it out, and cut it. And you can go from there. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna cut our next piece. As I said, we'll use our jig, take the same jig, we already made it once, so we can use this same jig as long as our angle doesn't change going up. And we're just gonna line it up with the end of this piece of siding. I don't have to worry about splits on this piece because there's one that was already cut. Line it up, I'm gonna mark it. And then I'm going to cut this side right away. And then we're going to measure our length. You remember what length we were cutting it at? I have to look. Good thing I wrote it down. So we're going to measure 73 and 13/16 as our length. Put that on the bottom, flip my jig over, and the same thing, I'm going to slide my jig until it hits that point. Make sure the bottom is completely lined up. I'm on that length. And we're going to trace it. Once I cut this, I'm going to show you another way of getting a dimension so you don't have to measure up there. So there's our piece. Now something different that we can do. Instead of measuring up there, you can measure down here if you're the cut person and you have somebody that you're working with. Maybe you're the ground guy doing all the cutting. You have somebody on the plank and scaffolding hanging the siding. You can hook on your bottom, measure your 6 inches, put a mark here. On this side, do the same thing on the other side. Put a mark. Now you can measure your long to long, 37 3/8. Write that dimension down. Now you'll have your length for your next piece. So you won't have to have the guys on the scaffolding measure it. You won't have to wait for a dimension. You can just start cutting another piece. Or if you're by yourself, instead of going up and down numerous times, you can cut all the pieces. You don't want to cut a lot, but you can cut it 2, maybe 3 pieces. Just in case something changes with the roof, sometimes the soffit or whatever goes a little wonky and you're going to need to make adjustments as you go. So I wouldn't cut 10 pieces. But I wouldn't be afraid to cut 2 or 3 and then go and put those on. And if you have somebody up there and you're the cut guy and you have somebody on the scaffolding doing the installing, they can tell you the adjustments as you're going. They'll say, hey, add a 16th or an 1/8 to that. Hey, you need to change the angle on the right. The short point's got to be a little bit longer. Things like that, and you can make those adjustments. So we'll put this piece on, we'll cut our next piece and get these both put on, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so we got our last piece of siding. We put this piece up, we finished nailing everything else off, and our last piece of siding. So when we put this piece on, there's going to be a little bit of tension in this area. We're going to need to put a nail at the top. We're going to put a nail here in the center and over on each end. So we put a nail on each end. We don't want to be real close to it where it's going to cause it to split. One way to check your piece, we don't have any line to go off of. On each end, check your 6 inches and see where you're at. So I put it up there, and it happened to work out that I'm right at 6 inches on both sides. Sometimes you're going to have to adjust it left and right a little bit. And so we'll put our nail in. And this is where it gets important. As you're pounding those nails in, you're just getting the nails snug. You're not pounding them like you're hitting a wall. You're just going to snug those nails up. And when you're putting them over here, there's a good chance there isn't going to be a stud there, and you're just going into the plywood membrane or whatever you have for sheeting. But you need to get a nail on that end so that board doesn't start to cup and warp away. Now you got to get a nail up on top, and we'll see if we can do it without it. A lot of times it might not be a bad idea to drill a pilot hole so it doesn't split. I'm going to come down a ways and tap slightly. Once I know I'm through, I can hit a little harder. And just snug that nail up so you don't split the board. If you hit it too hard, your board's going to split into pieces. So we have it sided. Now, before it gets finished, we'll end up caulking all of our joints. What would have been nice to do is putting a 2x4 rake board up here, going from here to here, here to here. Then our siding butting up against that. We didn't do that. On this project, we're matching what's existing on the home. And so this is how it was done on the home. I hope that helps explain how to install cedar lap siding. Like I said, we determined that we're going to go with a 6-inch lap, so we created a story pole. If you have, starting on the bottom of your foundation, you determine where you'll put your first piece. Usually you'll lap the bottom of your siding 1 inch over the top of your foundation if you can. Put your snap line end to end, get your first row on, take your story pole. You can make your story pole 10 feet tall if you want. Put a mark if you got 6-inch siding, 6.5, 7-inch, whatever your lap is going to be, put a mark in that location all the way up the pole. Cut your pole so it works out exactly to the increments of the lap you're going to have, so that way you can flip your pole upside down and it won't make a difference. So you won't have one end different than the other when you're snapping your lines. All right, well, thanks for watching, guys.